Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar in the ALMA 2021 Continuing Your Leadership Journey virtual program. My name is Thad Gurley, and I will be moderating today's discussion on 10 tips to better collaboration through improved communication. Before we get started this morning, I want to let everybody know that we are having some technical difficulties with the video, so we apologize for that. So we'd like for our webinars to be interactive, so we urge you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. Our speaker will address the questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Please use the QA icon on the bottom of your Zoom webinar browser to submit questions. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but if we run out of time during the question and answer session, I will forward any unanswered questions to the presenter. The webinar is being recorded and details will be posted on our webinar shortly following the webinar. I would especially like to thank our gold sponsor, BioCare, for sponsoring our fourth webinar. Representatives from BioCare provided a short video for the audience to watch.
Our goal really is the advancement of science, is ensuring that pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies and anybody working to develop treatments for people around the globe are able to do so and able to get over the logistics hurdles. We're a specialist courier for the pharmaceutical, biotech and life science industry. At BioCare we work with customers of all sizes, from the large global pharmaceutical businesses down to small laboratories, startup companies and a huge range in between.
We instantly got the vibe that it was a company that we could easily work with, but also can rely on and also have their expertise guide us as a business. Just having that confidence that somebody is looking after our shipments and the fact that they know what they're doing.
One of the things that I always say to staff when they come in is their job is to move a shipment from A to B, but it's really important that they don't think about this as moving a shipment from one place to another, but they think about the consequences of that shipment. And if we do our job really, really well, we allow those scientists to focus on developing treatments and saving lives and advancing science. We've got a large proportion of our employees who have a scientific background, who can understand our customers and what they're doing and what it is we're shipping. We recruit people who have very strong logistics experience.
We're a small cog in a big wheel, but a very important one. You know, it's life-saving medicines that we're delivering at the end of the day. And to me, that's what inspires me to do this job.
The thing that keeps me coming into the office is the opportunity to help our customers develop treatments for patients around the globe. What we're doing is actually helping those customers get treatments to their patients and ensuring that we're saving lives. We're helping improve people's lives around the globe every day and with every shipment.
Without BioCare sponsorship, we would be unable to provide our webinars to the ALMA community free of charge. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Sherry Petro. Sherry is the Director of Human Resources at BSK Associates and an accomplished strategist, organizational development professional, and executive coach. Her diverse professional background includes customer service, operations, administration, sales, marketing, and strategic planning. Sherry has acquired the cross-departmental expertise to see organizational challenges from a number of angles. Sherry focuses on workplace communications, usually a culprit when strategies fail. She works to create stellar communication. Her current passion is educating organizations on how to increase organizational sustainability by leveraging the talents and skills of all in multi-generational workplaces. Sherry, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Thad. One more second. Here we go. So I have the opportunity to talk about something I'm really passionate about, 10 tips to better collaboration through improved communication, because I can't say in all of the years that I have been working in organizations that people have ever come to me and said, communication around here is stellar. So knowing that we always have room to grow, and the combination, it's really required when you're talking about collaboration to have enhanced communication. But let's start with what exactly is collaboration? One of my favorite quotes on collaboration is from Heidi Gardner, distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School. And she says collaboration is diverse minds working together with the empowerment and ability to tackle complex problems. You know, it's particularly useful when you need multiple skill sets and perspectives that are going to help you not overlook opportunities and challenges. It allows us to leverage diversity. Cross-gender collaboration, for example, adds richness. It invites buy-in. Collaboration elevates everybody's status. It says, hey, you matter. People participate when they feel they matter. It helps us deal with strategic issues because not one person can see the entire picture. So the bigger the issue, the more essential that collaboration becomes. We can solve long-term challenges and solutions. It's so important when we want every voice in the room, those people that are very important to participate. One of the things that I would suggest is when we start our collaboration, we look around and we go, hey, is anybody missing? Because we want to make sure that the people who have things to offer are there. We use collaboration when we want to learn, we need a commitment to a decision, and when it's important for us to work through problems in a relationship. So what's required for good collaboration? Skillful interaction, the ability to manage conflict. I would tell you that I think people who can really manage conflict well have a leg up when it comes to their leadership skills. Because so many of us, depending upon our personalities, are like, oh yeah, I don't do real well with conflict. And yet we know it's going to be there. It's not like there are balloons and unicorns in all of the relationships that we have. So if we can skillfully interact and learn how to manage conflict well, that's excellent for good collaboration. And then sometimes you just got to get down and dirty, and it's going to be required that you will be able to negotiate. So negotiation, a good skill. So bottom line, yeah, you really need the ability to communicate in order to get to this place where we get that good collaboration. And so you might be thinking, that sounds like a lot of work. Well, what are the benefits? We have shared purpose. We get to solve problems, and we're more productive in the places that we're at. So when we sent the blurb out about this particular webinar, we talked about what is the sweet spot for collaborative decision-making. Some research was done by, let's see, I think this was Linda Grattan and Erickson, that spoke to the point that sometimes our problems when we talk about collaboration is we've got too many people in the room. And so what we end up with is compromised behavior and consensus decision-making where not everybody agrees. Well, on the other hand, we could have just one person making the decision, but that ends up being autocratic and railroading. So there's this sweet spot in the middle, and we have to be careful about it because when you take over on the left-hand side, some of this is driven by just how much time we have available. The other thing to think about, though, is on the right-hand side is what is the quality of decision that we're looking for? Because if you have too many people, perhaps your quality is going to be compromised. If you have just one person, well, that's just their opinion. So what's the sweet spot? When we're doing collaboration, 5 to 7 people, okay, I put 5 bodies there, but 5 to 7 people are the collaborative decision-making sweet spot because that allows for integrative behavior. People can really work through things. You have the opportunity to put things on the table. You get a lot of that multiplicity that I talked about when I spoke to why use collaboration. So mark one thing off already. The collaborative decision-making sweet spot is having 5 to 7 people involved in the collaboration. So tip number 1, have the best number of people on your team. More from Linda Grattan and Tamara Erickson. They published some work having taken a look at, I want to say this one was more than 10,000 collaborations. And they said, here are some of the things that can get in the way. All right, we already talked about large size teams. That was on the last slide. But the other thing that can be a conundrum is virtual participation. Well, so noted that they did this work prior to the pandemic. I'm really wondering now, after the fact, if they do a follow-up study, whether they would say the same thing happened. In the original research, we talk about if we're going to do virtual participation, the best thing to do is to get the group together first in person so that relationships are established. And then you go to virtual participation. We didn't exactly have that as an opportunity over the last 19 months or so. So I am wondering now if we have shot through some of those things that were more of an issue. I think we're a little bit better at picking up voice tone, body language in a different type of environment, but it is definitely one of those things that in their original research, they saw could be an issue. A conundrum is around team diversity. And the interesting thing is it's both sides, not having enough diversity and having too much diversity in such that there's not respect for the diverse opinions of the people on the team. The other thing that might play particularly well here is higher education levels. And where they go is if we don't have a growth mindset and are willing to continue and learn, and we have a number of experts very deep into what they have to offer, if they're not respectful of other people's education levels, it can get in the way. Some things that we have to work through. So tip number 2 is we have to set up the collaboration for success by creating and honoring rules of engagement. I like to use that, sometimes you go into meetings and everybody's talking at the same time and you're like, okay, we should have established some rules. The other really great thing about establishing rules, if you do it ahead of time, instead of when the subject comes up, you're more apt to get a better result. Why? Because when people are into talking about their subject matter, they can get quite passionate. And perhaps they're not as open for a collaborative partner because they haven't made room for them. So how do you set up these rules of engagement? You ask questions like, are we going to have a growth mindset? John Maxwell talks about this concept of enlargement. Are we going to build off of each other's ideas? Are we going to assume positive intent? That anybody who's bringing an idea forward, it is coming from their place of passion and that there isn't an ulterior motive. So the really cool thing about this is if you set this up front, you're essentially recognizing that, hey, these things could happen. We don't want them to happen. So we're going to try to put some rules together and then follow those rules so it doesn't happen. How are we going to handle the inevitable conflict? Because we come from different places. I always find it so fascinating when we think that we're always going to get along. Human nature and our world has shown us that not to be true. So let's acknowledge it. When we have conflict, how are we going to handle it? Respectfully, within a short period of time, don't let it fester. Oh, here's another one. What happens when somebody is absent? Are they the person that gets all of the action items? Who is going to bring them into the fold because they were absent? Is it their responsibility to reach out and communicate why they weren't there and what their action items are? Is it the responsibility of whoever is the chair of that committee or the collaboration or the leader of the team, which gets us to the next one? What roles are we each going to take? Is there going to be anybody is that the sentinel at the door that is going to say, hey, we didn't follow that rule? But the idea here is, and you can tell, right? All of this is going to require communication skills to set up good rules of engagement so we don't find ourselves stuck in this place of not being able to get our work done or the productivity. All right, so let's see, what other kind of communication tips, now that we've got 2 down, can we offer? So tip number 3, when we are communicating, we want to do so with curiosity, genuine curiosity. Have you ever been collaborating with somebody and they use that tone of voice that essentially says, I think you're crazy? Not always the best place to come from if you really want your collaborative partner to be bringing 100% to the table. So you want to ask things with genuine curiosity. One of the things from a human resources and organizational development perspective is I love people. So it's easy for me to be curious to try to understand why they think the way they do. So I would encourage you, having a growth mindset, to open that up. And you just never know what you don't know. And so you come to the table with curiosity of, I wonder where that came from. I wonder what I don't know yet. A place of inquiry. And as you can see, I'm asking questions of myself and of the other person. I'm not assuming negative intent. I'm not assuming that they just want to put the kibosh on our collaboration. So I'm going into it with curiosity and inquiry. The other thing is situational humility. You're in a collaboration and you're supposed to be the leader, supposed to be. And somehow you think that means that you're supposed to have like 80% of the answers, but you don't. And when we're doing collaboration, you want to be able to open it up and say, okay, I'm not sure about this one, or I'm not the expert in this area. I should be reaching out to Renee. So situational humility, you don't have all of the answers. I once worked with a teaming partner that I got what I call the cosmic 2x4. She said, after the collaboration, would you be open to some feedback? Absolutely, yes. And she said, well, I just want to share with you that you are not the greatest collaborative partner. I am floored, of course, because I am thinking, I teach this stuff. This is about 10 years ago. Thankfully, I got better. She said, you try to give 100% and then don't leave anything for me as your collaborative partner to add to the table. And you're like the law of diminishing returns. You're really great up to about 80%, and then you spend all of this time on that last 20%, trying to get to the closure of the project. And that's where my gift was. And you didn't let me give it. And I went, wow, situational humility. Why did I think that I had to get all of the answers? So the role that we play in collaborations is, even as leaders, we rotate off if we don't have the information. So tip number 3, have this type of mental model so that you can communicate well. Tip number 4, be audience aware. And I am using audience in a very broad way here. When we talk about audience, we're talking about everybody else who's in the collaboration. If you got 7 people, it's the other 6 people. Really, what's important to them? Why are they passionate about this? Were they voluntold to be a part of this collaboration? And maybe for them, it's a little hard to bring 100% because they're sitting there going, I'm not even sure why I'm here. Pick up on cues. We all have different personalities. There are some people that are extroverts, right? And give them airtime. If you could see me put my hand up, I'd have my hand up. Give them airtime, they'll take it. And you have to be cognizant of making sure that you leave room for everybody else to be able to bring their thoughts forward. I'm on an executive team where we have a very wise individual who often will just be sitting there synthesizing. And if we don't call on him and say, hey, Mark, what do you have to offer? He's just putting pieces together. And then he comes up with these gems of wisdom from what he's been able to see and take in. If we were just doing our thing and not paying attention to how that collaborative partner works, we would miss the wisdom that he brings to the table. So tip number 4 in your collaboration, be cognizant of the people, their motivations, and soon you're going to learn about the communication style. What is the style that they bring forth? So it's interesting when we talk about collaborations and communication, because it starts with you, But communication is all about making sure that you're connecting with the people around you. So we can't get so stuck in our skill sets and not be paying attention to where everybody else is in the room. All right, time for tip number 5. I have taught a listening course for a number of years, and when I did the research on this, it's truly fascinating. We don't really listen as well as we think we do. And one of the reasons is there's a number of blocks that get in our way. So as I explain these, perhaps over to the side on a piece of paper, you might want to think for yourself, like, which one of these am I guilty of? Okay, so one of your collaborative partners is talking and you are comparing. It sounds like this in your head. I'm smarter than him. Aren't I smarter than him? Which one of us is smarter, her or me? Am I better? Mind reading. You assume you know what the other person is thinking or feeling. This can be particularly difficult, by the way, if you are on a collaborative team, you've known this person for a very long time, or if you've known your team members and you think you know what they're going to say, and you then stop them and try to finish their sentences. Mind reading. Rehearsing, focusing your attention on what you're going to say next. If you're in a new team and you don't know your teammates and everybody, the facilitator or maybe the leader says, well, let's go around and introduce ourselves. Are you sitting there really listening to anybody else talk, or are you rehearsing what it is that you are going to say and so you miss it? Are you judging? Deciding that whatever somebody else is saying is wrong and closing your mind to what is being said. Maybe a germ of what they had to say was incorrect, but you wholesale discount what they have to offer. Dreaming, zoning out, drifting into your thoughts, mentally being in another place, time, or experience. So if somebody uses the word fishing, for instance, and all of a sudden you're on a deep sea fishing adventure, you're just zoning out. Identifying, relating everything back to your own experience. I once coached a woman. She was so excited about having a 45-minute session with her supervisor, and they went to lunch. And afterwards I said, okay, you wanted to make sure to get certain things out. And she goes, he spent 45 minutes talking about himself. So she started to bring something up. He wasn't listening. He was just trying to relate back to his own experience. And so we miss the richness of the communication. Advising. After a few sentences, you start giving advice and suggestions to the speaker. Hey, it's particularly helpful, by the way, if they haven't asked for it. Debating, arguing over every point and seeing the speaker as somebody to convince. I've got a friend like this. Sort of difficult being with her because the sky is blue. Really? Do you think it's really that blue? Well, look at it over here. That can be exhausting. Can you imagine being in a collaboration where everything needs to be argued? Being right, and I mean going to any length to avoid being wrong and believing that there's only one right way and it's mine. Derailing, suddenly changing the subject and the direction of the topic. Have you ever been in meetings and you're like, here's our objective, and you are working with your team, and then all of a sudden you're out in Timbuktu and you're like, how did we get here? Placating, seeking approval or agreeing just for the sake of keeping the peace. So these are the type of things that can get in our way. And we want to make sure to be able to open our minds and recognize what we do. Another one that's not up here, although I spoke about it, is interrupting. Like, what does that say? I'm interrupting you because I think what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. And we know that there are some people who like to dominate. And we have to pick when they take that breath and be able to say, let's make sure that everybody on the team has the opportunity to talk. By the way, if you're one of the leaders and you've got somebody that likes to dominate conversation, one of the things I do is ahead of time, if I know we're going into a meeting where they have a lot to say, I'll work it out with them so I already know things. And then I allude to the fact that they have offered things outside of the room. So saying it again is going to be redundant, right? Now we allow other people. If it happens in the discussion with folks, one of the things that I do is I'm like, that is excellent. And in fact, I need to go more in depth with you And I want to make sure that everybody else has the opportunity to put their thoughts in. So I have honored the fact that they have brought things up. Remember, create and honor rules of engagement. Honor is a big thing when we're collaborating. Moving on. Tip number 6, modify your communication style. Sometimes we get so caught up in how we like to communicate, and I happen to like, this is from HRDQ, and they talk about our communication style, identifying if we're spirited, we tell people what to do and we're highly assertive about it, almost assuming that they don't know and that they can be passionate about it. They display their emotions. Our considerate people, they may ask questions, they display emotions, they're highly expressive. But there is I'm waiting for my place to communicate with you. Whereas the spirited person is just going to jump right in. The systematic person is more controlling of their emotions. They might ask a question now and then. And as a considerate person, we have to make sure that we allow room for our systematic people, because if we don't say something to them or offer, give them space, they may not bring their ideas forward. The direct person tells people what to do, but controls their emotions. And sometimes when direct people say things, we're like, "Ooh, okay, that was direct." If communication is about making sure that we are connecting with people, then we really want to make sure that we're modifying our style in order to make that connection. We just can't get stuck with where we are. All right, so tip number 7. This is Julian Treasure. He has a great TED Talk about how we can use our voice as we are speaking to make sure that we are communicating in the way that we want to get the point across. So let's hear what Julian has to say.
And yet this is a toolbox that very few people have ever opened. I'd like to have a little rummage in there with you now and just pull a few tools out that you might like to take away and play with, which will increase the power of your speaking. Register, for example. Now, falsetto register may not be very useful most of the time, but there's a register in between. I'm not going to get very technical about this for any of you who are voice coaches. You can locate your voice, however. So if I talk up here in my nose, you can hear the difference. If I go down here in my throat, which is where most of us speak from most of the time. But if you want weight, you need to go down here to the chest. You hear the difference? We vote for politicians with lower voices. It's true, because we associate depth with power and with authority. That's register. And we have timbre. It's the way your voice feels. Again, the research shows that we prefer voices which are rich, smooth, warm, like hot chocolate. Well, if that's not you, that's not the end of the world, because you can train. Go get a voice coach. And there are amazing things you can do with breathing, with posture, and with exercises to improve the timbre of your voice. Then prosody. I love prosody. This is the sing-song, the meta-language that we use in order to impart meaning. It's route 1 for meaning in conversation. People who speak all on one note are really quite hard to listen to if they don't have any prosody at all. That's where the word monotonic comes from, or monotonous, monotone. Also, we have repetitive prosody now coming in, where every sentence ends as if it were a question, when it's actually not a question, it's a statement. And if you repeat that one over and over, it's actually restricting your ability to communicate through prosody, which I think is a shame. So let's try and break that habit. Pace. I can get very, very excited by saying something really, really quickly, or I can slow right down to emphasize. And at the end of that, of course, is our old friend, silence. There's nothing wrong with a bit of silence in a talk, is there? We don't have to fill it with ums and ahs. It can be very powerful. Of course, pitch often goes along with pace to indicate arousal, but you can do it just with pitch. Where did you leave my keys? Where did you leave my keys? It's a slightly different meaning in those two deliveries. And finally, volume. I can get really excited by using volume. Sorry about that if I startled anybody. Or I can have you really pay attention by getting very quiet. Some people broadcast the whole time. Try not to do that. That's called sodcasting. Imposing your sound on people around you carelessly and inconsiderately. And yet,
All right. So before I move into tip 8, there's a couple of things that I love about what Julian talks about. We don't think about how we use our voice. So a few years back, I was having a discussion with a gal at a biopharma, and she was second in charge of this biopharma. And she went in to talk to the president of the company. And it was during one of her performance reviews. And he said, I'd really like you to work on your confidence. And she said, confidence? Where do you get the idea that I'm not confident? And he said, well, when you speak, you tend to go up at the end of your sentences. It sounds like a question, as if you are doubting yourself. It was her cosmic 2x4 moment. Julian would say that's reverse prosody. So when we're having conversations, are we sounding like we're confident? Are we sounding like we're doubting ourselves? I would say that the people who work with me know that when I'm really passionate about something and I want to get a point across, I go slower. I definitely use silence. And there's something about that warm, hot chocolate of when there's gravitas to what we have to offer, and it's really important. It almost is like our voice box is trying to connect with our heart. Like, this is important. So communicate well. Don't minimize how you are communicating the voice toolbox that you have. All right, tip number 8, commit to explaining why you're thinking the way you do and link it back to the purpose. When I'm in a collaboration and I'm in a meeting and there's a particular subject that here's the outcome that we're looking for. I have that outcome written in front of me. I write it down because when things do go off, I want to be able to bring things back to what we said that we were here for. There is a great book. I reference her a lot. Jo Bolte Taylor was a neuroanatomist who in her 30s had a stroke, published a book called A Stroke of Insight. And in it, it's only like 184 pages, great book, by the way, but she's explaining how our brains work. And one of the things that she says is our brains are predisposed to try to make sense of the world with whatever information they have. If we don't share why we're thinking the way we do, the people around us are making it up. Yes, I use silence there for a reason. People are making things up if we don't tell them why we're doing the things that we're doing. So being transparent and choosing to share why we're doing or why we're taking that action allows us then to have more fodder for conversation, and linking it back to why this is purposeful is vitally important. All right, tip number 9, I actually alluded to this a little earlier. Let's say you're you're trying to collaborate and you want to communicate with somebody and they have sort of like a wild idea, but you don't want to say, boy, like, where did that come from? Obviously, that's not using all of the skills. You can say, yes, because you're acknowledging what the person said. And this is a technique they use in improv. If you've ever been in a communication workshop, this is one of the tools, exercises we use. You could do something like, let's build a bar on Mars. What are the type of things that we do? People come up with things and you're like, yes, and when we use the word but, I think that's an excellent idea, Jamie. But what if we do this? Essentially says, you didn't think it was an excellent idea. So try to minimize using but. Use and acknowledge by saying yes, and then build on each other. There can be this enthusiasm infection that you can start. And I know if we're assuming positive intent, somebody has a good idea, and then you see this and hear this palpable excitement when we have things to work on. I can remember a meeting about a month and a half ago, and we went into it and we're like, wow, okay, this is a dilemma. What are we going to do about this? And as we started talking about it, you could almost see like the the vortex starting and moving up because one person added something in. So you end up having this enthusiasm infection that allows you to build with each other. Tip number 9, always be building. And then tip number 10, when I first came to BSK Associates, it was an executive team meeting, and our current president likes to, okay, we've got new people in the room. Everybody, what's our rules of engagement? Which I love, because then coming in, you're like, oh, that's what people expect around here. And the idea is to use kind candor. I know that there's a book out right now on radical candor. I like some of the thoughts there as well, but I'm hearkening back to something that I think works really well, that we're going to be respectful with each other. And so maybe kind candor then links back to having those rules of engagement where we recognize that people are coming in with positive intent. And we may have disagreements. We will have disagreements, but we're going to be kind about it. And we don't want anybody feeling shut down. In the ironies of life, I'm on a small collaboration in another organization, a nonprofit that I support. And last Sunday, we were having a meeting. And somebody brought something forth and said, okay, everybody, let's talk about all the tools that we have. And then I piped in with a tool, and 3 out of the other 5, there were 5 of us, 3 of the other people said, that's not a tool. And I went, whoa, I could feel myself pulling back. I had to call them on it. That really wasn't kind. They were right. It wasn't a tool, but there was a better way of advising me of that. All right. So now you have the 10 tips. Have the best number of people on the team. If you can try to have 5 to 7, that would be great. Create and honor your rules of engagement. Model curiosity, inquiry, and situational humility. We may be experts, but we don't know everything. Be audience aware. Pay attention to what's important to the people around us. As a leader, this is so much more than just communicating in a meeting. It's your performance management, really understanding your people, understanding what motivates them. Monitor yourself. Recognize that you do have blocks to active listening. And active listening, you show support, you learn things, you show you care. Those are all important reasons to make sure that you blast through those blocks. Modify your style if you need to communicate with somebody else and you recognize, hey, this is how I communicate. Well, if you do, and you don't modify to some of those other styles, you might be missing something really important. Use that voice well. Commit to explaining why you're doing the things that you're doing. It really helps so people don't make up their own stories. Build and use kind candor. All right, so thank you so much for listening to my 10 tips. And that, if we've got any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, Sherry, thank you for that wonderful presentation on 10 tips to better collaboration through improved communication. So yeah, we have time for a couple questions. So the first question, Sherry, that I have is, tip 5, monitoring the listening blocks and the derailing part. So how can we keep from derailing from the topic? I know I have that problem quite a bit. So any advice on, how to keep from derailing?
So one of the things I do is, as I mentioned, I'll put something down. And if I feel like we're starting to move off of that, I'll call it and say, I think that there's an opportunity for us to talk about that at a different time. So it honors the fact that somebody brought it up and they want to go in that direction. But you're also saying we have a finite amount of time right now to be able to solve this problem. I put a Post-it note on for some of the virtual meetings, like up on my screen where nobody can see it, to make sure that we are staying on task. It's certainly, with everything that's going on, very easy to be able to divert ourselves. But if we say, I need to get back on topic, and have some little reminders for ourselves, that can help. And then just recognize the first time it happens. Really, when we create consciousness about this, if you know that this is something that happens to you, and you say, I am consciously going to make a decision to do this differently, you're already got the first step of the battle. So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, that's great. So another question that just came to the chat is, what tools do you use to encourage creativity within collaboration?
So knowing that we want to have a growth mindset, and if people do the same things that they've always done, there's this great exercise that Edward de Bono, he has this concept called parallel or lateral thinking. And he said, one of our dilemmas is we always tend to think the same way. So he has this exercise where people wear like different hats, and you are forced to put on somebody else's hat. So let's say I'm the human resources director, and I am talking to the lab director. And I know that something that's really important to her are facts and figures. And I'm more of like the heart-centered person. That's why I'm in HR. So I'll look at something and go, I cannot look just my way. I wonder what Belinda would think about this. So I encourage creativity by asking you to get in that other person's shoes. If you are a person that is really introverted and you're just like, okay, then you identify an extrovert in your sphere of influence and you're like, let me try to think like they think. So I think that there's great value in putting yourselves in other people's shoes. When it comes to processes to encourage creativity, I think we go outside our own sphere of influence. So I will often be looking at something and going, okay, this is BSK. I wonder what the American Heart Association would do if they took on this problem. So I think vaulting ourselves into entirely different domains to get creativity can be helpful. So those are just a couple of tips. Get in other people's shoes and get in other industries or other companies' shoes to see how they would handle it.
Yeah, well, this really been great, Sherry. Yeah, really enjoyed this. So this brings us to the end of our fourth webinar in the ALMA 2021 Continuing Your Leadership Journey virtual program. We would like to remind you that this webinar will be available to view later, and the details will be on the website soon. On behalf of ALMA, we would like to thank Sherry Petro for presenting today. Thanks again to BioCare for sponsoring our fourth webinar. We would also like to thank the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. For more information, here's the video again. So for more information on upcoming webinars, please visit the ALMA website, labmanagers.org. Please join us on November 5th for the 5th virtual program event, where Sherry Basner will present on how to overcome the discomfort of networking. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.